I've always been good at playing roles. The devoted wife, the caring daughter-in-law, the woman who remembers everyone's birthday and never forgets to send thank you cards. But my greatest performance has been these past 3 years, serving tea to Pamela Hartwell every single morning at exactly 8 a.m. Drink up. It's good for you, I'd say with that perfect smile I'd practiced in the mirror, and she would, because Pamela trusted me. After all, I was the woman who'd saved her precious son David from his self-destructive bachelor lifestyle. Pamela Hartwell. Even now, saying her name feels like swallowing glass. 3-time Golden Globe nominee, star of classics like Midnight in Manhattan and The Senator's Wife. In the 80s and 90s, she was Hollywood royalty. By the time I met David, she was clinging to relevance with the desperation of a woman who'd forgotten that fame has an expiration date. The first time I met her, she looked me up and down like I was something David had tracked in on his shoes. "So you're the little teacher," she said, the word teacher dripping with the kind of disdain reserved for people who work for a living. How quaint. I should have known then what I was dealing with. But I was young and stupidly in love with David, convinced that time and kindness would win her over. I thought if I just tried hard enough, if I was perfect enough, she'd eventually accept me. How naive I was. The manipulation started. Small. Little comments about my appearance at family dinners. "Sarah, darling, have you considered highlights? You look so plain." Suggestions that David deserved someone more sophisticated, someone who understood his world. You know, David's ex-fiancée, Melissa, just got back from Paris. She's opening a gallery in Beverly Hills. But Pamela was an artist of psychological warfare. She knew exactly how to plant seeds of doubt without David ever noticing. She'd praise me to his face, while systematically undermining me behind his back. Phone calls to David when I wasn't around, tearful conversations about how lonely she was, how she worried he was settling for less than he deserved. The real masterpiece was how she positioned herself as the victim. Poor Pamela, whose son was being stolen away by some nobody from Ohio. Poor Pamela, who'd given everything for her career and now faced old age alone. David, sweet, oblivious David, couldn't see the strings she was pulling. The breaking point came 18 months ago. David and I had been trying to have a baby, struggling with fertility issues that were taking their toll on our marriage. I'd just gotten back from another disappointing doctor's appointment when I overheard Pamela on the phone in her study. "Maybe it's for the best," she was saying to whoever was on the other end. "David's always been too soft-hearted. He needs someone who can give him children, not some barren schoolteacher who's already past her prime." Barren. The word hit me like a physical blow. But it was what came next that sealed her fate. "I've been thinking about introducing him to Catherine Walsh's daughter. You remember Catherine from Days of Glory? Her daughter Emma just finished at Juilliard. Beautiful girl. Comes from good stock. The kind of woman who could give David the life he deserves." That's when I knew Pamela Hartwell had to die. Not quickly, of course. That would be too merciful, too. Easy. No, Pamela deserved something special. Something that would let her feel her power slipping away as slowly and surely as her health. The research took weeks. Arsenic was the obvious choice. Colorless, nearly tasteless, and with symptoms that could easily be mistaken for the natural decline of a woman in her 60s. The beauty of arsenic poisoning is its subtlety. Fatigue, digestive issues, skin problems, all things that could be attributed to stress, age, or any number of natural causes. The hardest part wasn't obtaining the poison or calculating the dosages. It was maintaining the performance. Every morning, bringing her that perfect cup of Earl Grey with 2 sugars and a splash of cream. Every morning, watching her take that first sip while I smiled and asked about her plans for the day. "You're such a treasure, Sarah," she'd say sometimes, and I'd feel that familiar surge of rage mixed with satisfaction. If only she knew just how much of a treasure. I really was. The changes started small. Pamela began complaining of fatigue, of feeling off. Her famous complexion, which she'd maintained with religious devotion to skincare routines and regular visits to Beverly Hills' best dermatologists, began to look dull. She started canceling lunch dates, declining invitations to industry events. David noticed, of course. He worried about his mother, suggested she see doctors, specialists. And I was right there beside him, the concerned daughter-in-law, supporting every decision, accompanying her to appointments when David couldn't make it. "I'm so grateful you're here for her," David would tell me, kissing my forehead with the tenderness that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. "I don't know what we'd do without you." If only he knew. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to destroy my marriage, Pamela had actually strengthened it. David saw how devoted I was to his mother, how I put aside any personal grievances to care for her. He saw the woman he'd married, the woman he'd fallen in love with, kind, selfless, devoted. He just didn't see the poison I stirred into her tea each morning with the same loving care I used to pack his lunch. 3 years. That's how long it's taken to bring Pamela Hartwell to her knees. 3 years of perfect performance, of playing the role of the devoted daughter-in-law, while slowly, methodically, destroying the woman who tried to destroy my life. And the beautiful thing? She still doesn't suspect a thing. Drink up, I tell her each morning, watching as she lifts that delicate porcelain cup to her lips. It's good for you. By month 6, Pamela's legendary energy was noticeably flagging. The woman who once commanded film sets for 14-hour days was napping in the afternoons. She blamed it on a particularly harsh flu season, then on stress from a project that had fallen through. I just don't understand it, she confided to me one morning as I served her tea. I've always been so vital, so strong. My mother lived to 93 and never had a sick day in her life. Maybe you should take it as a sign to slow down, I suggested gently, stirring honey into my own cup. You've worked so hard your whole life. Perhaps your body is telling you to rest. She bristled at that, as I knew she would. Pamela Hartwell didn't slow down. She was a force of nature, a woman who'd clawed her way to the top, of an industry that chewed up and spat out actresses half her age. The suggestion that she might be anything less than invincible was an insult. I'm not some fragile old woman, Sarah, she snapped. I just need to find the right vitamins, the right doctor. There's nothing wrong with me that can't be fixed. But there was something wrong. And it was getting worse with each carefully measured dose I added to her morning ritual. The digestive issues started around month 8. Pamela began complaining of nausea, stomach cramps, loss of appetite. She lost 12 pounds in 6 weeks, which she initially celebrated as an unexpected benefit. I haven't been this thin since I filmed Roman Holiday Redux, she told David during one of our family dinners. Maybe whatever this is, it's not entirely bad. David frowned, pushing food around his plate. Mom, you need to eat. You're getting too thin. Nonsense. The camera adds 10 pounds, darling. I look fantastic. But she didn't look fantastic. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor that no amount of makeup could hide. Her famous auburn hair was losing its luster, becoming brittle and thin. The manicured nails she was so proud of had developed strange white lines across them. I researched each symptom meticulously, making sure I understood the progression. Arsenic poisoning was an art form, and I was becoming a master artist. The skin changes were particularly satisfying to watch. Pamela had always been vain about her appearance. It was her currency in Hollywood, her source of power. She spent thousands on facials, treatments, procedures to maintain the illusion of eternal youth. Watching that perfection slowly crumble was better than any revenge fantasy I'd ever imagined. I think I need to find a new dermatologist, she announced one morning, studying her reflection in the hallway mirror. Dr. Brennan clearly isn't using the right products anymore. Look at these lines, these spots. The spots were hyperpigmentation, a classic sign of chronic arsenic exposure. But Pamela saw them as a failure of her skincare routine, not a symptom of something more sinister. Maybe it's just stress, I offered sympathetically. You've been pushing yourself so hard with the auditions and meetings. That was another beautiful irony. As Pamela's health declined, so did her career prospects. Casting directors who might have considered her for mature roles were put off by her increasingly frail appearance. She looked sick, tired, older than her years. In an industry obsessed with youth and vitality, she was becoming invisible. They don't want real actresses anymore, she complained bitterly after a particularly disappointing audition. They want Instagram models who can barely deliver a line. No one appreciates craft, experience, talent. But I knew the truth. They didn't want her because she looked like what she was becoming, a dying woman. The neurological symptoms began in month 10. Pamela started complaining of tingling in her hands and feet, occasional confusion, memory lapses. She'd forget appointments, repeat stories she'd just told, struggle to find words that had once flowed effortlessly. I think I might need to see a neurologist, she admitted reluctantly one afternoon. We were sitting in her garden, the California sun streaming through the olive trees she'd had imported from Tuscany. I'm having trouble remembering things. Yesterday, I couldn't remember the name of my first acting coach. Margaret something. I worked with her for 3 years. Margaret Sinclair, I supplied helpfully. You've told me about her before. She taught you the Meisner technique. Pamela looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Yes, that's right. Margaret Sinclair. How did you remember when I couldn't? I have a good memory for the stories you tell, I said, which was true. I remembered. Everything about Pamela Hartwell. Every slight, every cruelty, every moment of humiliation she'd put me through. My memory was perfect when it came to reasons to hate her. The doctor visits became more frequent. Pamela saw internists, specialists, alternative medicine practitioners. They ran blood tests, imaging studies, cognitive assessments. But arsenic poisoning, especially chronic low-dose poisoning, was notoriously difficult to diagnose. The symptoms mimicked so many other conditions: autoimmune disorders, vitamin deficiencies, early-stage dementia. Each negative test result was a small victory for me. Each doctor who sent her home with reassurances that her symptoms were probably stress-related or age-related was an unwitting accomplice in my plan. Maybe you should consider therapy, one particularly condescending physician suggested. Sometimes when we're dealing with the natural aging process, anxiety can manifest as physical symptoms. Pamela was furious. He thinks I'm making it up, she raged to David that evening. 30 years of medical training and he thinks I'm some hysterical woman imagining symptoms. David held her while she cried, and I watched from the doorway, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. This was what she deserved. To be dismissed, diminished, treated like her concerns didn't matter. This was how she'd made me feel for years. We'll find another doctor, David promised. Someone who will take you seriously. But no doctor would take her seriously enough to test for arsenic. Why would they? She was a wealthy woman living in Beverly Hills, cared for by a loving family. Who would want to poison Pamela Hartwell? The answer was standing right there in the doorway, holding a tray with her evening medications and a fresh cup of chamomile tea. I brought your pills, Pamela, I said softly, entering the room with my practiced expression of concern. And some tea to help you sleep. She took the cup gratefully, her hands shaking slightly from the peripheral neuropathy that was slowly destroying her nervous system. Thank you, dear, she whispered. I don't know what we'd do without you. Neither did I. By the end of the first year, I had become indispensable. Pamela's condition had deteriorated to the point where she needed help with daily activities, managing her medications, keeping track of appointments, even basic tasks like grocery shopping and meal preparation. David was grateful beyond words for my dedication to his mother. He saw me sacrificing my own time and energy to care for the woman who had once tried to destroy our marriage. In his eyes, I was a saint. I know she wasn't always kind to you in the beginning, he said one night as we lay in bed. But look how you've risen above it. Look how you're caring for her now. You're amazing, Sarah. I nestled closer to him, letting him stroke my hair while I planned the next day's dosage. She's family, I murmured against his chest. Family takes care of family. The irony was delicious. In my quest to destroy Pamela, I had become the daughter she'd never had, the caregiver she depended on completely. She trusted me with her medications, her schedule, her very life, and I was using that trust to slowly, methodically kill her. The beauty of my method was its invisibility. To everyone around us, I was the devoted daughter-in-law who had put aside past grievances to care for an ailing woman. I accompanied Pamela to doctor appointments, took notes on her symptoms, advocated for her care. I was the perfect caregiver, attentive, knowledgeable, completely committed to her well-being. What no one knew was that I was also the cause of her suffering. The morning routine had become sacred. Every day at 8 a.m. sharp, I would appear at Pamela's bedside with her tea and morning medications. She had grown so weak that she rarely left her room before noon, spending her mornings in bed reading scripts that would never be produced, making phone calls to agents who had stopped returning her calls. "You're an angel," she would tell me as I arranged her pillows and opened the curtains to let in the morning light. I don't know what I did to deserve such kindness. What she had done was try to destroy my marriage, my happiness, my future. What she had done was call me barren, worthless, beneath her son. What she had done was plot to replace me with someone she deemed more suitable. But I never reminded her of these things. Instead, I smiled and told her it was my pleasure to help, that she would do the same for me. The lie came so easily now that I almost believed it myself. The physical changes were becoming impossible to hide. Pamela's weight had dropped to 98 pounds, her once voluptuous figure now skeletal and frail. Her hair had thinned to the point where she wore scarves and hats even inside the house. The hyperpigmentation on her skin had worsened, creating dark patches that makeup couldn't cover. But it was the cognitive decline that was most disturbing to watch. Pamela, who had once been sharp as a razor, quick-witted and verbally agile, was becoming confused and forgetful. She would start sentences and forget how to finish them. She would call me by other names, sometimes her sisters, sometimes her mother's, sometimes the names of long-dead friends. "Margaret?" she said one morning, looking at me with cloudy eyes. "Is that you, Margaret? I thought you were dead." "It's Sarah, Pamela," I corrected gently. "Your daughter-in-law. I brought your tea." She blinked slowly, reality reasserting itself. "Of course. Sarah, my David's wife. You're so good to me, dear." The doctors were baffled. Test after test came back inconclusive. They suspected autoimmune disease, early-onset dementia, possibly a rare neurological condition. But nothing fit perfectly. Nothing explained the constellation of symptoms that were slowly destroying Pamela Hartwell. "It's like her body is attacking itself," one specialist told David and me during a consultation. "But we can't identify the trigger. Sometimes these things just happen as we age." I nodded sympathetically, playing my role perfectly. "Is there anything we can do? Any treatment that might help?" "Supportive care," the doctor said. "Keep her comfortable, maintain her nutrition, monitor her symptoms. Sometimes these conditions plateau or even improve with time. But Pamela's condition wasn't going to plateau. If anything, I was considering increasing the dosage. 2 years in, and she was still alive, still breathing, still taking up space in David's life and mine. I was growing impatient. The opportunity came when Pamela developed pneumonia. Her weakened immune system couldn't fight off the infection, and she was hospitalized for 2 weeks. David was beside himself with worry, spending every available moment at her bedside. "What if we lose her?" he asked me one night in the hospital cafeteria. "What if this is it?" I took his hand across the table, looking into his eyes with all the sincerity I could muster. "She's strong," I lied. "She's been through worse than this. She'll pull through." But privately, I hoped she wouldn't. Pneumonia would be the perfect cover, the natural conclusion to months of mysterious illness. No one would question it. No one would investigate. Pamela Hartwell would simply fade away, another aging actress who succumbed to the inevitable march of time. Unfortunately, she recovered. Her body, weakened as it was, somehow found the strength to fight off the infection. She came home from the hospital even more frail than before, but alive. I was disappointed, but not discouraged. If anything, the hospitalization had reinforced my position as the indispensable caregiver. The nurses had praised my dedication. The doctors had commended my attention to detail. Even Pamela's few remaining friends remarked on how lucky she was to have such a devoted daughter-in-law. "You saved her life," David told me that first night she was home. "The way you advocated for her, made sure she got the right care. You saved my mother's life." If only he knew how many times I had tried to end it. But I was learning patience. Arsenic was a slow poison, and I was playing a long game. Every morning, I continued the ritual. Every morning, I watched Pamela take another step closer to the grave I was digging for her, 1 teaspoon at a time. "Drink up," I would tell her, just as I always had. "It's good for you." And she would smile and drink, trusting me completely, never suspecting that the woman caring for her so devotedly was the same woman slowly, methodically, lovingly killing her. The perfect crime required the perfect performance, and I was giving the performance of a lifetime. By the 8th month, Pamela's condition had deteriorated enough that David insisted on a full medical workup. Dr. Harrison, her longtime physician, ran every test imaginable. Blood work, scans, biopsies, the works. I accompanied her to every appointment, the dutiful daughter-in-law holding her hand in waiting rooms and taking careful notes during consultations. "Everything looks normal," Dr. Harrison would say, puzzled. "Your blood work shows some irregularities, but nothing that points to a specific diagnosis. Sometimes these things happen as we age." I nodded sympathetically, squeezing Pamela's hand. "We just want to make sure you're getting the best care possible." The beauty of arsenic is its subtlety. In small, consistent doses, it mimics so many other conditions. Chronic fatigue, digestive issues, skin problems, hair loss, all symptoms that could be attributed to stress, depression, or the natural aging process. The doctors were looking for cancer, autoimmune, disorders, neurological conditions. They weren't looking for poison. Pamela began keeping a health journal at Dr. Harrison's suggestion. She'd sit at her antique writing desk each evening, documenting her symptoms with the same meticulous attention to detail she'd once brought to script analysis. "Sarah, dear, could you help me remember? When did the nausea start?" she'd ask, pen poised over the leather-bound journal. "I think it was around the time you started that new vitamin regimen," I'd reply helpfully. "Maybe 3 weeks ago?" I was rewriting her medical history in real time, subtly shifting timelines and symptoms to obscure any patterns that might point to poisoning. When she mentioned stomach pain that coincided with our morning tea ritual, I'd remind her of the spicy dinner we'd had the night before. When she noted fatigue that seemed worse in the mornings, I'd suggest it might be related to her new sleeping pills. David threw himself into research, staying up late reading medical journals and consulting with specialists across the country. He loved his mother with the fierce devotion of an only child, and watching her decline was destroying him. "I feel so helpless," he confessed to me one night, his head in his hands. "She's always been this force of nature, you know. Seeing her like this." I rubbed his shoulders, offering comfort while internally calculating the next phase of my plan. "We'll figure this out. The doctors will find what's wrong." But I made sure they wouldn't. During one particularly thorough examination, I mentioned to Dr. Harrison that Pamela had been under significant stress lately. A failed film project, financial concerns, the usual anxieties of aging in Hollywood. I painted a picture of a woman whose body was simply succumbing to the pressures of a demanding life. "Stress can manifest in so many physical ways," Dr. Harrison agreed, "especially in someone who's lived as intensely as your mother-in-law." The third opinion came from Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a renowned internist at Cedars-Sinai. She spent 2 hours with Pamela, going through her history with a fine-tooth comb. I sat in the corner, the concerned family member, occasionally offering clarifying details that further muddied the waters. "Have you been exposed to any chemicals recently?" Dr. Chen asked. "Pesticides, cleaning products, anything unusual?" My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression neutral. Pamela looked thoughtful. "Well, we did have the house fumigated about 6 months ago," she said slowly. "Termites in the guest wing. I hadn't known about any fumigation, but I seized the opportunity." "Oh yes, that was quite extensive. They had to tent the whole east side of the house. You were so worried about the chemicals." Dr. Chen made a note. "That could explain some of the symptoms. Low-level chemical exposure can cause fatigue, digestive issues, skin irritation. The effects can be cumulative and long-lasting." Another dead end, another false trail. I was becoming quite skilled at this game of medical misdirection. The most dangerous moment came when Dr. Chen suggested testing for heavy metals. "Sometimes environmental exposure can cause these kinds of systemic symptoms," she explained. "Lead, mercury, arsenic, they can all mimic other conditions." I felt the blood drain from my face, but Pamela was already shaking her head. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary. This old house has been thoroughly inspected. David had everything tested when he inherited it." "Still," Dr. Chen pressed gently, "it might be worth ruling out." "Doctor," I interjected, "Pamela's been through so many tests already. She's exhausted, and frankly, we're all getting a bit overwhelmed. Maybe we could start with the treatments you've suggested and see how she responds?" Pamela nodded gratefully. "Sarah's right. I just want to start feeling better." Dr. Chen acquiesced, prescribing a regimen of vitamins and supplements that would do absolutely nothing to counteract the poison I was feeding Pamela every morning. If anything, the additional pills would further complicate her digestive system, masking the arsenic's effects even more effectively. That night, I lay awake next to David, listening to his steady breathing and marveling at how close I'd come to discovery. One blood test, one simple heavy metal screening, and my carefully constructed plan would have crumbled. But luck favors the prepared, and I'd been very, very prepared. The next morning, I brought Pamela her tea as usual. She looked up at me with genuine gratitude, her once bright eyes now dulled by months of systematic poisoning. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Sarah," she said, her voice weaker than it had been just weeks before. "You've been such a blessing to this family." I smiled and kissed her forehead, tasting the irony as sweet as the sugar I stirred into her Earl Grey. "Drink up," I told her. "It's good for you." And she did, just as she always did, trusting me completely while I slowly, lovingly, methodically killed her. The doctors would never find what was wrong with Pamela Hartwell. How could they? They were looking for disease, for genetic predisposition, for environmental factors beyond anyone's control. They weren't looking for love. They weren't looking for devotion. They weren't looking for a daughter-in-law who brought tea every morning with the dedication of a saint and the patience of a killer. By month 10, Pamela had lost nearly 30 pounds. Her once lustrous silver hair had thinned considerably, and her skin had taken on a grayish pallor that no amount of expensive skincare could remedy. She moved through her grand house like a ghost of her former self, but her mind remained sharp, dangerously so. It was during one of our morning tea sessions that she first brought up the will. "Sarah, dear, I've been thinking about the future," she said, setting down her cup with trembling hands. "About what happens to all this when I'm gone." I kept my expression carefully neutral, though my pulse quickened. "Pamela, you shouldn't talk like that. You're going to be fine." She gave me a look that was vintage Pamela Hartwell, penetrating, knowing, slightly amused. "Darling, I may be sick, but I'm not stupid. Whatever's happening to me, it's not getting better. I need to make sure everything is in order." The Hartwell estate was worth approximately $47 million. I knew this because I'd made it my business to know. The Malibu house alone was valued at $12 million, and that didn't include the art collection, the jewelry, or the various investment properties scattered across California. "David will inherit everything, of course," she continued, "but I want to make sure you're taken care of too. You've been so devoted, so caring. I couldn't have asked for a better daughter-in-law." I reached across the table and took her hand, noting how cold her fingers had become. "That's very thoughtful, but David and I don't need anything. We just want you to get better." "Nonsense," she said firmly, some of her old authority returning. "I'm adding a codicil to the will. $5 million plus the beach house in Carmel. It's the least I can do." $5 million. The beach house was worth another $2 million, easily. My careful ministrations were about to pay dividends I hadn't even calculated. "Pamela, I don't know what to say. That's incredibly generous, but nothing. It's decided." She picked up her teacup again, draining the last of the poisoned Earl Grey. "I'm calling Harrison Blackwood this afternoon. He's been the family attorney for 30 years. We'll have the papers drawn up by the end of the week." That afternoon, while Pamela napped and David was at his office, I found myself alone in her study. The room was a shrine to her career. Walls lined with awards, photographs with Hollywood legends, first edition scripts from films that had defined generations. I sat in her leather chair, running my hands over the mahogany desk where she'd made decisions that shaped the entertainment industry. $7 million, plus whatever David would inherit, which would become mine eventually anyway. The numbers were intoxicating, but they also presented a new problem. If Pamela died too soon after changing her will, it might raise questions. Suspicious timing had destroyed more than one carefully planned murder. I needed her to live long enough for the inheritance to seem natural, but not so long that she might recover, or worse, become suspicious. It was a delicate balance that required adjusting my dosage with surgical precision. That evening, David came home with news that complicated matters further. "Mom's hired a private investigator," he announced over dinner. I nearly choked on my wine. "A what?" "She thinks someone might be trying to scam her. Apparently, she's been getting calls from people claiming to be long-lost relatives, investment advisors, that sort of thing. You know how vulnerable wealthy elderly people can be to con artists." The irony was so thick I could taste it. "That's probably wise," I managed. "His name is Marcus Webb, former LAPD detective, specializes in financial crimes and elder abuse. Mom wants him to do a full security assessment of her affairs." I excused myself to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. A private investigator. This was not part of the plan. Webb would be looking for external threats, but any competent investigator would also examine the people closest to Pamela, her daily routines, her caretakers, her family. When I returned to the dining room, David was still talking about the investigator. "He's starting tomorrow. Mom wants him to interview everyone who has regular access to the house. The housekeeper, the gardener, the cook. Even us." "Us?" "Just routine questions. Who has keys, who handles her medications, that sort of thing. Nothing to worry about." Everything to worry about, actually. But I smiled and nodded, already calculating how to handle this new threat. The next morning, I prepared Pamela's tea with extra care. If a private investigator was going to be poking around, I needed to be absolutely certain there was no trace evidence anywhere. I'd been meticulous from the beginning, but now I double-checked everything. The tea tin, the spoon, the cup, even the sugar bowl. Marcus Webb arrived at 10 o'clock sharp. Through the kitchen window, I watched him walk up the front path. A compact man in his 50s with the measured gait of someone accustomed to observing details. He carried a leather briefcase and wore the kind of unremarkable suit that allowed him to blend into any environment. Pamela greeted him in the living room, and I could hear their voices through the closed door as I prepared lunch. Professional, cordial, but with an undercurrent of wariness on both sides. Webb was clearly experienced in dealing with wealthy clients who'd lived long enough to develop healthy paranoia. "Mrs. Hartwell, I understand you've been feeling unwell lately," I heard him say. "Have you noticed any changes in your household routine? New service providers? Unfamiliar people around the property?" "Nothing out of the ordinary," Pamela replied. "The same staff we've had for years. My son and daughter-in-law have been wonderful, of course. Sarah brings me tea every morning, such a dear girl." My hand froze on the sandwich I was preparing. Even through the door I could hear the investigator's pen scratching across paper. "How long has that routine been in place?" Webb asked. "Oh, nearly a year now, ever since I started feeling poorly. Sarah insists on taking care of me personally. She's very devoted." More scratching. I forced myself to continue making lunch, but my mind was racing. Webb would want to interview me, probably today. I needed to be ready with answers that were truthful enough to be believable but vague enough to avoid suspicion. The interview came after lunch. Webb was polite but thorough, asking about my background, my relationship with Pamela, my daily routines in the house. I played the role of the concerned daughter-in-law perfectly, worried about Pamela's health, grateful for her generosity, devoted to her care. "You bring Mrs. Hartwell tea every morning?" he asked, consulting his notes. "Yes, it's become a little ritual of ours. She loves Earl Grey, and I enjoy our morning chats. It's one of the few things that seems to comfort her these days." "Do you prepare the tea yourself?" "Of course. I know exactly how she likes it. 1 sugar, a splash of cream. I've been making it, the same way for months." Webb nodded, making another note. "And you're the only one who prepares her morning tea?" "Well, I suppose Maria could do it. She's our housekeeper. But Pamela seems to prefer when I do it. I think it makes her feel cared for." It was all true, technically. The best lies always were. After Webb left, I found Pamela in her study, looking more animated than she had in weeks. "What did you think of Mr. Webb?" she asked. "He seems very thorough. I'm glad you're taking precautions." She studied me for a long moment, and I had the unsettling feeling that she was seeing more than I wanted her to see. "You know, Sarah, I've been thinking about our morning teas." My blood turned to ice. "Oh? I was wondering if we might try something different. Maybe green tea or chamomile. The Earl Grey has been tasting a bit off lately." The room seemed to tilt around me. Off how? I'm not sure. Bitter, maybe? Or just different than usual. "Perhaps we need a new tin." I forced a laugh. "Of course. I'll pick up some new varieties tomorrow. Whatever you'd prefer." But as I left her study, I could feel her eyes following me, and for the first time since I'd started this elaborate dance of death, I wondered if Pamela Hartwell might be more dangerous than I'd given her credit for. That night, I lay awake calculating dosages and timelines, but also something else. The growing possibility that my victim was becoming suspicious of her. Killer. The game was changing, and I wasn't sure I was still winning. The next morning, I arrived at the Hartwell estate with a selection of new teas. Chamomile, peppermint, green tea, and a lovely jasmine blend I'd found at a boutique shop in Beverly Hills. But when I entered the kitchen, I found Pamela already there, standing at the counter with my usual tin of Earl Grey in her hands. "Good morning, dear," she said, without turning around. "I was just examining this tea. It's quite interesting." My blood turned to ice, but I forced a bright smile. "Oh, you don't need to worry about that. I brought some new options for you to try." She turned then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. A calculating coldness that reminded me why she'd been such a formidable force in Hollywood for decades. "You know, Sarah, I've been thinking about something Dr. Chen mentioned. About environmental toxins." She set the tin down carefully, her movements deliberate. "I did some research last night." "Research?" I kept my voice light, but my heart was hammering. "About arsenic poisoning, specifically." She opened the tin and inhaled deeply. "Did you know that arsenic is nearly tasteless? Especially when mixed with something as robust as Earl Grey." The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. I could feel sweat beating on my forehead despite the morning chill. "Pamela, what are you suggesting?" I managed to ask. "I'm not suggesting anything, dear. I'm stating facts." She moved to the kitchen island, placing the tin between us like evidence in a courtroom. Fact 1. My symptoms began shortly after you started this lovely morning ritual of ours. Fact 2. They're worse on days when I drink more tea. Fact 3. They improve slightly on weekends when you're not here. I opened my mouth to protest, to deflect, to lie, but she held up a hand. I'm not finished. Fact 4. You've been remarkably helpful in steering my medical care away from certain tests. Fact 5. You've shown an unusual interest in my will and David's inheritance. Her voice grew stronger with each word, the old Pamela emerging from the frail shell I'd been creating. And fact 6. You underestimated me. This is ridiculous, I said, but my voice cracked. You're sick, Pamela. You're not thinking clearly. On the contrary, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. She pulled out her phone. I had this tea tested yesterday. A private lab, very discreet. The results were quite illuminating. My legs felt weak. You can't be serious. Arsenic trioxide. Consistent doses over an extended period. Enough to cause chronic poisoning, but not enough to trigger immediate suspicion. She smiled, but it was cold and sharp. It's actually quite clever. I might have used a similar plot in one of my films. I stared at her, my carefully constructed world crumbling around me. You can't prove anything. Can't I? She held up her phone. I've been documenting everything for the past week. Our conversations, your reactions, your little suggestions about my medical care. And I've saved samples of the tea from several different days. Even if that were true, I said desperately, who would believe you? You're a sick old woman. Everyone knows you've been confused, forgetful. Everyone knows what you've told them I am. Her voice cut through my protests like a blade. But I've been in this business for 50 years, Sarah. I know how to play a role and I know how to direct a scene. I've been performing for you while gathering evidence. The realization hit me like a physical blow. You've been pretending. Some of it, yes. The weakness, the confusion, the grateful dependence on your care. Though I must say you really were poisoning me quite effectively. I do feel genuinely terrible. She laughed, a sound devoid of humor. But I've been managing my symptoms, limiting my tea intake when you weren't watching, taking chelation therapy on the weekends. Chelation therapy? To remove heavy metals from the bloodstream. A friend of mine is a doctor, someone you've never met, someone who could run tests without your knowledge. She moved closer, and I could see the steel that had made her a legend. Did you really think I'd built a career in Hollywood without learning how to spot a performance? I felt trapped, cornered, like an animal. What do you want? What do I want? She seemed genuinely surprised by the question. I want to know why. Why poison me slowly when you could have just waited for me to die naturally? Why this elaborate charade? Because you were never going to die naturally, I snapped, my composure finally cracking. You were going to live forever, holding on to your money, your house, your control over David. He deserves better than waiting for your approval for the rest of his life. Ah, she nodded as if I'd confirmed something she'd suspected. So this was about David, about his inheritance. It was about our future, our life together. You were the only thing standing in the way of that. I see. She was quiet for a moment, studying me with the intensity of a director evaluating an actor's performance. And you thought murder was the solution. I thought love was the solution, I said, surprised by my own honesty. I love David more than you ever could. I would do anything for him. Sacrifice anything. Even this. Even becoming a killer. Even that. She nodded slowly, then picked up her phone. Well, Sarah, I'm afraid your performance has come to an end. Wait, I said quickly. Before you make that call, there's something you should know. She paused, finger hovering over the screen. I've been documenting everything too. I lied smoothly. Every conversation, every moment of supposed confusion, every time you've been perfectly lucid when you thought I wasn't paying attention. If you expose me, I'll expose you for the manipulative fraud you really are. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face, and I pressed my advantage. Think about it, Pamela. Even if you can prove I poisoned you, what happens then? A trial? Media attention? Your precious reputation dragged through the mud? Is that really how you want your story to end? She lowered the phone slightly. What are you proposing? A different ending, I said, my mind racing. One where we both get what we want. The kitchen fell silent again. Two actresses sizing each other up, each waiting for the other to break character first. But this wasn't a movie, and there would be no director to call cut when the scene went too far. This was real life, and in real life, someone always had to lose. The question was, who would it be? Pamela set her phone down on the counter, her eyes never leaving mine. I'm listening. I took a deep breath, knowing this was my only chance. You want to protect your legacy, your reputation. I want a future with David. We can both have what we want. Go on. You announced that you're stepping back from public life due to health concerns. Natural aging, nothing suspicious. You quietly transfer a significant portion of your assets to David. Not all of it, just enough to secure our future. In return, I disappear from your lives forever. She laughed, but there was no warmth in it. You think I'd reward you for trying to murder me? I think you're a pragmatist, I said carefully. You've survived in Hollywood for 50 years by making smart deals, even with people you didn't like. This is just another negotiation. And if I refuse, then we both lose everything. You'll spend your remaining years in court battles and media scandals. I'll go to prison. David will lose both of us and inherit a fortune tainted by scandal. I leaned forward. Is that really what you want for him? Pamela was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the marble countertop. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. You know, there's something almost admirable about your ruthlessness. In another life, you might have made a good producer. Is that a yes? It's a consideration. She picked up the tin of Earl Grey, turning it over in her hands. But there's one problem with your proposal, which is, you tried to kill me, Sarah. You poisoned me for months, watched me suffer, and felt nothing. What makes you think I could ever trust you to honor any agreement? I felt the walls closing in again. Because you'll have leverage. The evidence, the documentation. If I ever come back, if I ever try to contact David or cause problems, you can destroy me. I can destroy you right now. But then David loses his inheritance to legal fees and scandal. You know I'm right. She was quiet again, and I could see her weighing the options. Finally, she spoke. There's a third option you haven't considered, which is, I could kill you. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I stared at her, trying to determine if she was serious. Think about it, she continued conversationally. An unstable young woman, obsessed with my son, breaks into my home and attacks me. In self-defense, I'm forced to, defend myself. The arsenic in my system could be explained as something you gave me during the struggle. You're bluffing. Am I? She opened a kitchen drawer and pulled out a large carving knife, testing its weight in her hand. I've played this scene before, you know. Death at Midnight, 1987. I was quite convincing. My mouth went dry. Pamela, you're not a killer. Neither were you, until you decided to be. She took a step closer. The difference is I have 50 years of experience playing roles. I know how to sell a performance. David would never forgive you. David would never know. As far as he's concerned, you simply disappeared. People do it all the time. Young women who get in over their heads, who realize they've made terrible mistakes. She smiled coldly. He might even be relieved eventually. I backed toward the kitchen door, but she moved to block my path. The beautiful thing about this solution, she continued, is that it solves all our problems. My reputation remains intact. David inherits everything without scandal, and you get the ending you deserve. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. The question is, do you want to make this easy or difficult? I looked around desperately, searching for another exit, another option, anything. But Pamela had positioned herself perfectly, and I realized with growing horror that she'd been planning this conversation just as carefully as I'd planned her murder. You know what the irony is? She said, advancing slowly. I actually was getting sicker. The doctors found early-stage pancreatic cancer last month. I probably only have a year or two left anyway. My legs hit the kitchen island, trapping me. Then why? Because it's the principle of the thing. You don't get to decide when I die. You don't get to steal my son's love through manipulation and murder, and you certainly don't get to profit from it. She raised the knife, and I saw my death reflected in the blade. Wait, I screamed. I have something you want. She paused. What? David doesn't know about the cancer, does he? Her expression flickered. That's none of your business. He doesn't. You haven't told him because you don't want him to see you as weak, as dying. You want to control how your story ends. I was talking fast now, desperate. But what if I told him? What if I revealed that you knew you were dying and chose to hide it from him? How would that affect your precious legacy? You're grasping at straws. Am I? Or am I offering you one last deal? I met her eyes steadily. Let me walk away, and your secret dies with me. Kill me, and I promise you, I've left evidence that will destroy your relationship with David forever. It was a complete bluff. I had no such evidence, but I could see doubt creeping into her expression. You're lying. Maybe, but are you willing to risk it? The knife wavered in her hand. Here's what's going to happen, I said quickly. I'm going to walk out that door and disappear forever. You're going to tell David that I realized our relationship was a mistake and left to start over somewhere else. In 6 months, you're going to tell him about the cancer and spend your remaining time building the relationship you should have had all along. And if you ever come back, I won't. Because unlike you, I actually love David enough to want him to be happy, even if it's not with me. We stared at each other across the kitchen, two women who had both loved the same man in our own destructive ways. Finally, Pamela lowered the knife. You have 10 minutes to pack and leave, she said quietly. If I ever see you again, if you ever contact David, if you ever try to profit from this story, I will destroy you in ways you can't imagine. Understood. And Sarah? She looked at me one last time. The next time you decide to poison someone, choose a victim who wasn't raised in Hollywood. We invented betrayal. I nodded and walked toward the door, my legs shaking with each step. As I reached the threshold, she called out one final time. I hope it was worth it. I paused, thinking of David, of the future we'd never have, of the love that had driven me to become someone I didn't recognize. So do I whispered, and walked out of Pamela Hartwell's life forever. Behind me, I heard her pick up the phone, but she wasn't calling the police. She was calling her son. I made it 3 blocks before my legs gave out completely. Sitting on a bus stop bench, I watched the sun set over Beverly Hills and tried to process what had just happened. My hands were still shaking as I pulled out my phone. 17 missed calls from David. Before I could decide whether to call him back, my phone rang. His name flashed on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But I knew that would only make things worse. Sarah? Thank God. Where are you? Mom said you left upset about something, but she wouldn't tell me what happened. His voice was concerned, loving, everything I was about to lose forever. David, are you okay? You sound strange. I closed my eyes, trying to find the words. Pamela had been right about one thing. I did love David enough to want him to be happy, even if it meant breaking both our hearts. I need to tell you something, I said finally, and I need you to listen without interrupting. Sarah, you're scaring me. I'm leaving, David, tonight. I'm going back to Portland, and I won't be coming back. Silence on the other end. Then, what? Why? What happened with my mother? She made me realize some things about myself, about us, about what I was becoming. I took a shaky breath. I'm not the person you think I am. That's ridiculous. Sarah, whatever she said to you, she didn't say anything that wasn't true. The lie tasted bitter, but it was necessary. I've been using you, David, for your money, your connections, your lifestyle. And when I realized your mother saw right through me, I panicked. I don't believe that. Believe it. I'm sorry, but this was never real for me. Not the way it was for you. Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller, hurt. Is this really how you want to end things? With lies? My heart broke a little more. He knew me too well. Sometimes lies are kinder than the truth. Sarah, please, come home. We can work through whatever this is. There's nothing to work through. I've already booked a flight. Another lie, but I'd make it true within the hour. I'm sorry, David. I really am. I hung up before he could respond and immediately turned off my phone. The next few hours passed in a blur. Airport, ticket counter, security, gate. I bought the first available flight to Portland with cash, using my maiden name. As the plane lifted off, I watched Los Angeles disappear beneath the clouds and wondered if I'd ever see it again. Chapter 8. New Beginnings. Portland welcomed me back with rain and the familiar smell of coffee and pine. I found a small apartment in Southeast, paid 6 months' rent in advance, and tried to disappear into anonymity. For the first month, I barely left the apartment except for groceries. I'd wake up each morning and reach for my phone to text David, then remember that Sarah Chen was dead. I was Rebecca Chen again, my real name, the one I'd abandoned when I moved to LA. I got a job at a small accounting firm downtown. Nothing glamorous, just processing invoices and reconciling accounts. My coworkers were nice enough, but I kept my distance. I'd learned the hard way what happened when I let people get too close. 3 months after leaving LA, I was walking home from work when I saw him. David was sitting on the steps of my apartment building, looking older and more tired than I remembered. My first instinct was to run, but my legs wouldn't move. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly. Or should I say Rebecca? I sat down beside him, maintaining careful distance. "How did you find me?" "It wasn't easy. You covered your tracks well." He looked at me with those familiar brown eyes. "But I'm persistent when it comes to people I love." "David, you shouldn't be here." "Probably not, but I needed to know the truth." "I told you the truth." "No, you told me what you thought I needed to hear." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. "This is what my mother looked like the day after you left." The image showed Pamela in a hospital bed, looking frail and connected to various monitors. My breath caught. "She collapsed that night," David continued. "Severe dehydration, electrolyte imbalance. The doctor said it looked like she'd been slowly poisoned. I felt the blood drain from my face." "David, they found arsenic in her system, Sarah. Significant levels, consistent with long-term exposure." The world seemed to tilt around me. "Is she? She's alive, recovering, but she almost died." He turned to face me fully. "The police want to question you." I started to stand, but he caught my arm gently. "I told them you'd been out of town for weeks before you left, that you couldn't have been responsible." "Why would you do that?" "Because I know you, Sarah, the real you, and the woman I fell in love with isn't capable of murder." Tears started flowing before I could stop them. "You don't know me at all." "Then tell me who you really are." Chapter 9. Confessions. We sat on those steps for 3 hours while I told him everything. The loneliness, the desperation, the gradual descent into something I didn't recognize. The tea, the arsenic, the months of watching his mother slowly deteriorate, the final confrontation and the deal we'd made. David listened without interrupting, his expression cycling through disbelief, horror, and something that might have been grief. When I finished, we sat in silence as rain began to fall around us. "Say something," I whispered finally. "I don't know what to say." His voice was hollow. "The woman I love tried to murder my mother. I know. She lied to me for months. I know. She made me an accessory by not telling me. I know." I wiped my eyes. "I know all of that, David. That's why I left." "But you stopped?" I looked at him in confusion. "What?" "You stopped poisoning her. Before I found the arsenic. Before anyone suspected anything. You could have finished what you started, but you didn't." "Why?" I thought about it, trying to remember those final weeks. Because I realized I was becoming someone I hated. Someone who could watch another person suffer and feel nothing. That wasn't love. It was obsession. "And the deal you made with her?" I kept my end. "I disappeared. I never contacted you, never tried to profit from the story. I got a job under my real name and tried to build a normal life." David was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "She's dying, Sarah." "What?" "Cancer, pancreatic. She has maybe 6 months left." He looked at me with tired eyes. "The arsenic poisoning actually helped the doctors catch it early. In a twisted way, you might have saved her life." The irony was almost too much to bear. "David, I'm so sorry." "I know you are, but sorry doesn't change what happened." "No, it doesn't." I stood up, rain soaking through my jacket. "You should go. Back to her. Spend whatever time you have left." "Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me." I looked down at him, this man I'd loved enough to become a monster for. "I want you to be happy. I want you to forgive your mother and yourself. I want you to find someone who deserves you." "And what about what I want?" "David, I want the woman I fell in love with back. The one who made me laugh, who challenged me, who saw the world differently than anyone I'd ever met." He stood up, closing the distance between us. "I want to believe that person was real. She was real. But she's gone." "Is she?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Tell him the truth about the cancer. All of it. P." I stared at the message, my hands shaking. "What is it?" David asked. I looked up at him, realizing that even now, even after everything, Pamela was still playing the game, still manipulating the pieces on the A board. And I had to decide, would I be her pawn one last time, or would I finally choose my own move? Chapter 10. The final truth. Your mother knew, I said quietly. Knew what? About the cancer. She's known for months. I showed him the text. She knew she was dying when I was poisoning her. David's face went white. That's impossible. She told me the night I left. She said she had early-stage pancreatic cancer, that she probably only had a year or two left anyway. But, she just told me last week. She said the doctors found it because of the arsenic poisoning. She lied. I felt a familiar anger rising, but this time it wasn't directed at Pamela. It was directed at the whole situation, the web of lies and manipulation we'd all become trapped in. She's been lying to both of us. David sank back down onto the steps, his head in his hands. I don't understand. She wanted to control her narrative, how her story ended. She didn't want you to see her as weak or dying. I sat beside him again. When I tried to poison her, she probably saw it as convenient, a way to explain her symptoms without revealing the cancer. So she let you think you were killing her? More than that, she used it. She let me believe I was succeeding, let me dig myself deeper until she had enough evidence to destroy me if she wanted to. But why tell you the truth that night? I thought about it. Because she wanted me to know that even my attempt to murder her wasn't enough to break her, that she was still in control, even of her own death. David was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. She's been manipulating both of us. Yes, the whole time. Yes, even now. He gestured to my phone. This text. She wants you to tell me, wants to see what happens when I know the truth. Probably. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. God, we're all so fucked up. David. No, it's true. You tried to kill her, she manipulated us both, and He trailed off. What? I still love you. Even after everything you've told me, even knowing what you did, I still love you. He looked at me with desperate eyes. What does that make me? Human, I said softly. It makes you human. We sat in the rain, two broken people who had loved each other badly and been used by someone who loved control more than anything else. What happens now? David asked finally. I don't know. The police will probably arrest me if they find me. Your mother has enough evidence. She won't turn you in. How can you be sure? Because she's dying, and she wants to control how her story ends. Having her son's girlfriend arrested for attempted murder doesn't fit the narrative she's trying to create. I considered this. So what does she want? I think she wants to see if we can find our way back to each other. If love can survive this much damage. Can it? David was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over and took my hand. I don't know, but I'd like to try. I looked down at our intertwined fingers, remembering the first time he'd held my hand. We'd been walking through Griffith Park, talking about our dreams and fears. I'd felt so hopeful then, so full of possibility. It won't be easy, I said. No, I'll probably have to face charges eventually. Maybe. Your mother will never forgive me. Probably not. And you might wake up one day and realize you can't forgive me either. That's possible too. I pulled my hand away. Then why? Because the alternative is living without you, and I've tried that for 3 months. It doesn't work. David, I'm not saying we go back to how things were. We can't. Too much has happened. He stood up and offered me his hand. But maybe we can find something new. Something honest. I stared at his outstretched hand, knowing that taking it would mean stepping back into the chaos. Back. Into Pamela's games. Back into a life where nothing was simple or safe. But it would also mean stepping back into love. I took his hand and let him pull me to my feet. So what's the plan? I asked. First, we go back to LA. Together. And then? Then we tell my mother that we're done playing her games. That if she wants to spend her remaining time with her son, she'll have to accept that you're part of the package. She'll never agree to that. Then she'll die alone. His voice was firm, resolved. I'm done choosing between the people I love. As we walked toward his rental car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. It was fragile and uncertain, built on a foundation of lies and betrayal and forgiveness that might not last. But it was real. And sometimes, real is enough. The morning sun filters through the kitchen window of our modest apartment in Portland, casting golden rectangles across the worn wooden table where David sits reading the newspaper. His hair has grown longer, touched with premature gray at the temples. A consequence, perhaps, of the weight he's carried these past 5 years. He's wearing a simple flannel shirt and jeans, a far cry from the designer suits that once filled his closet in Beverly Hills. I watch him from the counter where I'm preparing coffee. Just coffee, black and simple, and marvel at how different our lives have become. The apartment is small, maybe 800 square feet, with creaky floors and a radiator that clanks through the winter nights. But it's ours, purchased with honest money from honest work, and there's something profoundly peaceful about that. The Hartwell Foundation awarded another round of grants, David says, folding the arts section of the paper. 15 emerging artists this quarter. Mom would have been proud. I nod, carrying his coffee to the table. Even now, 5 years after Pamela's death, we rarely speak her name directly. She passed away 18 months after our confrontation in her kitchen, officially from complications related to her mysterious illness. The doctors never did find a definitive diagnosis. Her death certificate listed systemic organ failure of unknown origin as the cause. Only 3 people knew the truth: Pamela, myself, and now David. I told him everything 6 months after we moved to Portland. The guilt had been eating me alive, manifesting in panic attacks and sleepless nights. I couldn't build a life with him on a foundation of lies, no matter how well-intentioned. I expected him to leave, to call the police, to look at me with the horror and disgust I deserved. Instead, he held me while I cried and said, "I know." He'd known since the day his mother called him, the day after our kitchen confrontation. She'd told him everything, about the poison, about my plan, about the choice I'd made to walk away. She'd also told him something I didn't know at the time. She'd been dying anyway. "The doctors found it 3 weeks before you stopped," David had explained, his voice hollow with old grief. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. She had maybe 6 months left, 8 if she was lucky. She never told me because she didn't want me to watch her waste away. She said what you were doing was almost merciful compared to what was coming." The revelation had shattered something inside me. All those months of careful planning, of measured doses, and calculated cruelty, and Pamela Hartwell had been dying anyway. The universe's idea of cosmic justice, perhaps. Or just another reminder that we're never as in control as we think we are. "She forgave you," David had continued. "She said anyone who could walk away from that much power, who could choose love over revenge, deserved a second chance. She made me promise to give you one. And so here we are, 5 years later, living a life neither of us could have imagined." David runs a nonprofit that provides grants and mentorship to struggling artists, funded, ironically, by his inheritance from Pamela. The Hartwell Foundation has become one of the most respected arts organizations on the West Coast, and David throws himself into the work with the passion of someone seeking redemption. I work as a senior accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown. It's honest work, if not particularly glamorous. My colleagues know me as Sarah Chen, the quiet woman who brings homemade cookies to office parties and never misses a deadline. They don't know about the year I spent slowly poisoning a Hollywood legend, and I pray they never will. We've never married, though we've been together all this time. There's an understanding between us that some relationships exist outside traditional frameworks. We love each other, but it's a love tempered by knowledge of what we're both capable of. I know David struggles with the fact that he fell in love with someone who tried to murder his mother. He knows I struggle with the fact that I'm capable of such calculated cruelty, but we've built something real together, something honest. We volunteer at the local animal shelter on weekends. We have a small garden where we grow tomatoes and herbs. We host dinner parties for David's artist friends, and I've learned to cook dishes that don't require precise measurements or careful timing. The nightmares have mostly stopped, though they still come. Occasionally. I dream about Pamela's kitchen, about the weight of the poison tin in my hands, about the moment I chose to walk away. Sometimes I dream about alternative endings. What would have happened if I'd continued, if I'd seen it through to the bitter end? In those dreams, I'm sitting in Pamela's mansion, surrounded by her things, married to her son, and completely alone. I always wake up grateful for this small apartment, this simple life, this complicated love. David looks up from his paper and catches me watching him. "What are you thinking about?" "Just this," I say, gesturing around the kitchen. "Us, how we got here." He reaches across the table and takes my hand. His fingers are stained with paint. He's been working on a piece for the Foundation's upcoming gallery show. "Do you regret it? The choice to stop?" It's a question he asks sometimes, usually on the anniversary of his mother's death, or when we've had too much wine and the conversation turns philosophical. I think he needs to hear my answer, needs the reassurance that I chose him over revenge, love over hatred. "Never," I say, and I mean it. I regret starting, but I'll never regret stopping. He nods, satisfied, and returns to his paper. But I continue thinking about his question as I finish my coffee and prepare for another day at the office. The truth is more complicated than my simple answer suggests. I don't regret stopping, but I sometimes wonder about the woman I was becoming in those months of careful planning and patient execution. There was a power in it, a dark satisfaction in being the architect of someone else's downfall. It frightened me then, and it frightens me now, but I can't deny that part of me misses the intensity of it. I've learned to channel that need for control into healthier outlets. I organize charity events with military precision. I maintain our household budget with obsessive attention to detail. I research our vacation destinations with the thoroughness of a CIA operative. David finds it amusing, this need I have to manage and plan and control every detail of our lives. He doesn't understand that it's how I keep the darker impulses at bay. Sometimes I wonder what Pamela would think of the life we've built. Would she approve of the foundation that bears her name? Would she be proud of the man her son has become? Would she forgive me for the months of terror I put her through, even knowing she was already dying? I like to think she would. In our final conversation, she'd seemed almost relieved that someone finally knew her secret, that she wasn't facing her death entirely alone. Maybe that's why she never called the police, why she chose instead to call her son and orchestrate our escape from Beverly Hills. Maybe she understood that we were all trapped in roles we'd never chosen, the grieving son, the ambitious daughter-in-law, the dying matriarch, and that sometimes the only way out is to write a different ending entirely. The coffee maker beeps, signaling it's finished brewing. David folds his paper and stands, kissing my forehead as he passes. "I love you," he says, simple and direct, the way he says it every morning. "I love you too," I reply. And I do. It's a different love than what I felt in those early days of our relationship, when passion and ambition drove me to such dark places. This love is quieter, steadier, built on full knowledge of each other's flaws and failures. As David heads to the shower, I clean up the breakfast dishes and prepare for another ordinary day in our extraordinary ordinary life. In a few hours, I'll be reviewing spreadsheets and attending budget meetings. Tonight, we'll cook dinner together and watch a movie on our secondhand couch. This weekend, we'll tend our garden and maybe drive out to the coast. It's not the life I once imagined for myself, but it's the life I chose when I walked away from Pamela's kitchen that day. It's the life I earned when I decided that love meant more than winning, that some prices are too high to pay, even for everything you think you want. And every morning, when I make our simple coffee in our simple kitchen, I remember the weight of that poison tin in my hands and the moment I chose to set it down forever. Some stories don't end with victory or defeat. Sometimes they end with the quiet courage of choosing to be better than you were, even when no one is watching, even when no one would ever know the difference. This is our story now. Not the one I planned, but the one we're writing together, one ordinary day at a time.